Every club has its rival, but some rivalries go far beyond sports, becoming true battles for titles, dominance, and even culture that divide entire countries. So in this video, we'll see the biggest rivalry of each continent, from Africa going through the Americas, Asia, Oceania, and finally Europe. We'll also make a ranking of each one to see what is the biggest rivalry of the entire world. So let's start with Africa, home to tons of rivalries, but the biggest one happened in Egypt. In Egypt, there are simply the two biggest clubs of the entire continent, the biggest winners of the Egyptian Premier League and the African Champions League, Al Ahly and Zamalek. Yeah, both the biggest Egyptian and African Champions League winners come from the same city. So you can imagine what happens when they face each other, creating what is called the Cairo Derby. On top of that, Al Ahly has been known in the past as the club of the people, while Zamalek was often associated with the elite. This made the rivalry even bigger. But the peak of the derby happened in 2020, when both teams faced each other in the African Champions League final. The Cairo Derby is without a doubt the biggest rivalry in Africa. For now, it stands in first place. But this derby will lose its first place, cause now we'll go to the biggest rivalry in South America. Home to 3 World Cup winning national teams, South America have many famous clubs, some of which have even won the Club World Cup. But by far, the biggest rivalry comes from the capital of Argentina, Boca vs River. It's a crazy rivalry that started over a century ago. River Plate was founded in a neighborhood called La Boca in 1901, the same neighborhood that Boca Juniors would also be founded, so the rivalry began there. But with time, River Plate eventually moved to a wealthier neighborhood, earning the stigma of being a club of the elites at the time, while Boca was the club of the ordinary people. But what really intensifies the rivalry is the strength of both clubs. River Plate is the biggest Argentine champion with 38 titles, while Boca Juniors follows closely with 35. Also on the continental stage, River Plate has 4 Copa Libertadores titles, while Boca Juniors has 6. But the peak of the derby was in 2018, when both River and Boca reached the Copa Libertadores final, an unprecedented clash to determine the continental champion. But as you can expect, it didn't go well. It was gonna be played over 2 legs. Then after a tie in the first match, Boca went to play the second leg in River's stadium. But then this happened. Look what happened to Boca's bus. Even players got injured. So because of that, the match was postponed and ultimately played far away, in Santiago Bernabeu. Yeah, that far, where River Plate confirmed their title. The so-called Super Clásico is by far the biggest rivalry in South America and now tops the ranking as the biggest rivalry so far. Now before going to North America, Asia, Oceania and Europe, let's move up the map to reach Central America. Yeah, Central America is a sub-region, not a continent on its own, but for the sake of this video, we'll separate it from North America. So Central America doesn't have the same sports investment as other places. For reference, the biggest club in terms of titles is Deportivo Saprissa, whose market value today is 13 times smaller than Inter Miami's. However, it's Saprissa that forms a big rivalry against another club of its country, Alajuelense, giving birth to the so-called Clásico Nacional. The Costa Rican Derby stands out because these two are the last 2 Central American clubs to win the continental title. But this rivalry is much smaller compared to the others, so for now it stands in 3rd place. Now let's talk about a much bigger rivalry, the greatest in North America. North America is home to the MLS, which has rivalries such as New York City vs New York Red Bulls, the Texas Derby between Houston and Dallas, LA Galaxy vs LAFC, etc. But the MLS is too young, so these rivalries are nothing compared to the ones from Mexico. The Mexican League has been around for 80 years, with different clubs coming from the same city. In Guadalajara, there's the derby between Guadalajara and Atlas. In Monterrey is Tigres against Monterrey, and in the capital city there are 3 professional clubs, each with its own derby. But the biggest is none of these. It's actually a clash so big that's called the Mexican Super Clásico, America vs Guadalajara. These are the 2 most supported clubs in the country. On top of that, Club America is the biggest winner of the Mexican League, while Guadalajara comes right behind them. being the second biggest winner. But the rivalry goes beyond trophies. America is from the capital and seen as a wealthy club, so much so that they are owned by Mexico's largest broadcaster and sign many foreign players. On the other hand, Guadalajara has a policy of only signing players of Mexican descent, making them more nationalist and representing the countryside. So with all that, the Mexican Super Clásico stands as the biggest rivalry in North America. Now in our ranking, it stands in third place. But before going to Europe, we still have the biggest rivalry in Asia and Oceania. So let's leave the Americas and go to the largest continent on the earth, home to half of the world's population. So Asia is filled with clubs, from the J-League to the Saudi Pro League. Now if we think of rivalry in terms of club sizes, the winner would definitely be the Saudi El Clásico, Al Hilal versus Al Ittihad. These two are among the biggest in Asia, with both having Asian Champions League trophies and being the top winners of the Saudi Pro League. But it's not the most intense derby on the continent. To find what is considered by many the biggest rivalry there, we have to go to Iran. In Iran, there's a so-called Tehran derby, a rivalry so intense that it fills the country's largest stadium. Persepolis versus Teghlal. These are the two biggest teams there, often dominating the National League and regularly appearing in the Asian Champions League. However, the rivalry goes beyond football. Historically, Teghlal was supported by the former Iranian monarchy, making it associated with the upper classes. Meanwhile, Persepolis was linked to the working class and common people, which fueled the rivalry even further. Today their fans are divided into all spectrums. On top of that, the two clubs wear completely opposite colors, making the stadium on derby days look crazy. So the Tehran derby is the biggest rivalry in Asia, though there are certainly other contenders also. Alright, so before we head to Europe, let's go to Oceania, which is literally the smallest continent, but still have its rivalries. Well, the largest league of the continent is the Australian A-League. It is part of the AFC, but geographically it's in Oceania. So in Australia, we find a rivalry not only between clubs, but also cities. Melbourne and Sydney, home to Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC. These two cities have been rivals for over 100 years due to culture, economy and much more. So the biggest club from each city begins a clash in sports as well, creating the biggest rivalry in Oceania, the so-called Big Blue. On top of that, Sydney FC is the most successful club in Australia, while Melbourne Victory comes in second place. But in terms of size, it's the smallest derby of the video. For now, the Boca vs River is the biggest rivalry. But now let's go to the stage for the world's biggest clubs, Europe. I'd have to make an entire video just to cover the biggest rivalry of each country, but one of the greatest of all is the so-called the Old Firm, Celtic against Rangers. These two clubs from the city of Glasgow have been fighting each other for over 130 years, being literally the two dominant forces there. Celtic has 54 Scottish Premiership titles, while Rangers boast an incredible 55 times. Imagine that! But the rivalry goes far beyond football. It even involves religion. Celtic was founded by a Catholic priest to support Irish immigrants, so to this day it maintains Catholic roots and ties to movements like Irish republicanism. Meanwhile, Rangers has roots in Protestantism and is more associated with conservatism, supporting movements such as Scotland remaining in the UK. But this difference became very clear when Queen Elizabeth passed away, because while Rangers fans paid a tribute to her, the Celtic ones were seen mocking her death. Quite a contrast. Today this rivalry is great as ever, so much that both teams faced each other in the last Scottish League Cup final and Glasgow turned to this. But in Europe, there are other rivalries, like Red Star vs Partizan, Ajax vs Feyenoord, Milan vs Inter and many more. But there's a rivalry which two clubs have battled for dominance, not just in their country, but for the European titles, the great El Clásico. But it's not just about titles and trophies. Like other rivalries we've seen, this one has roots that goes far beyond the pitch. Barcelona is the capital of Catalonia, a region in Spain where a large part of the population seeks independence. They even speak their own language, Catalan. Meanwhile, Madrid is the capital, so Real Madrid represents the centralization of power in the capital and Spanish nationalism, while Barcelona represents Catalan identity. Hence their famous slogan, Mexican club, more than a club. These differences became even greater during the Franco dictatorship. because the General Francisco Franco suppressed Catalan independence movements, so Barcelona became a symbol of resistance. On the other hand, many people accused Real Madrid of being supported by the same general, which only intensified the rivalry. So the El Clasico and the Old Firm are the two biggest in Europe. In terms of size, investment and viewership, the biggest is definitely the El Clasico. But for its passion, the fiercest rivalry in Europe is definitely the Old Firm, standing as the biggest in the entire world. So if you enjoyed this video, I think you're gonna like this one too. Thanks for watching and bye!